Welcome back to Dead Good Book Reviews. I'm Judith and you're watching another rapid fire review video here on the channel. This is where I try and review a new release within 24 hours of reading it. It doesn't always go to plan, but I'm trying my hardest. Today, you've seen the title, you've seen the thumbnail, we're talking about Babel by R.F. Kuang. It is the 19th of September when I'm filming this. I finished this yesterday on the 18th. That's how time works. And I'm ready to tell you about it. No plan, no script, no anything. I'm just going to give you my initial here's my gut feelings on things. Some quick disclaimers before we start. I did receive a review copy of this book in audiobook form. This is the Waterstones edition I bought myself, but the review copy I had was the audiobook and I did get sent that for free from the publisher. Regardless of where books come from, nobody's paying me to talk about books and all opinions are my own. I'm going to keep this as spoiler-free as humanly possible. I'm going to have to talk about, I think the best way I can describe it, I'm going to talk about the mood of the end of the book. So if you don't want to know anything about that, click away and come back when you've read it and we'll chat about it then. But broadly speaking, very spoiler free. Lastly, I will link the story graph for the book below in case you want to check any user-generated content warnings. Ba-da-ba-ba. So, Babel has been on my list of books to read this year since it was announced, because I loved R. Kuang's The Poppy War trilogy. It's one of my favourites. The ending, I think, is not stellar. I think we could all agree The Burning God was interesting. However, I loved R.F. Kuang's writing, and I'm a big believer in seeing writers develop over time, and so when they announced this book, I was like, okay, that sounds interesting. However, I am a person who has read a good number of books set in Oxford, and who has liked some of them, and disliked a fair number of them. And I think part of that comes from having been there, and when you've been somewhere, it can be a little bit hard to completely fall into the fantasy of things. It's like watching detective shows set in Oxford, where you're like, well, that's not where that road goes, and now I've fallen out of it and I can't immerse myself in this. Sometimes that can be the case, particularly for magical Oxfords, and we'll come on to where this book sits with that later. But so I went in knowing I was probably going to have a good time, but not sure if I would absolutely love it. I think the other thing to bear in mind is that I am someone for whom dark academia as a genre doesn't always work. I do have a video planned on dark academia as a genre versus an aesthetic, and I'd quite like to talk about that at some point, but that is not this video. Suffice to say, I think this ticks both boxes, to be honest. In this book, Robin Swift, our main character, is rescued from, I'm going to put that in huge inverted commas, Canton, where he is born and raised, and is taken to England by a professor who raises him up and basically instructs him in a whole bunch of language stuff, ancient Greek, Latin, all the above, so that he can one day go to Babel, which is a languages and translation institute in Oxford. There we go, makes sense. The cover, Tower of Babel, it all makes sense. By the way, I'm going to say Babel for this. I've been saying Babel for this. There is an interview where R.F. Kuang says Babel. I think it is probably the case that you can say either because the audiobook says Babel. So I'm going to say Babel because that's what I think it is. And that's kind of tying into the themes of the book. So I'd say the first 20% of the book is getting to university. And then we have a big chunk of university where Robin learns what the Babblers at Babel do, which includes various things from translation, just interpreting, that's the word I'm looking for there, and also silverworking, which is sort of the magic of this world, where through translating on silver bars, you can create these silver bars that do specific things. But that's sort of what the setting of the book is. But I would say the book is more about exploring the idea of loving the place that you are, while simultaneously acknowledging the terrible things that place has done and is doing. And particularly in the context of colonialism, which makes a lot of sense when you think about the Poppy War and R.F. Kuang's previous books, when you then think about, like, yeah, that is kind of what it's like to be at Oxford, where you're surrounded by beautiful things and getting to explore and to learn and to meet like-minded people in a lot of ways and meet people who become your friends, but you're in this very bizarre situation of having to factor that in with your own morals on where all of this came from, right? Where did the money to build this come from? I think R.F. Kuang's definitely writing from a place of personal truth there as well, but it really hit home for me. I think that was probably one of the stronger elements. So the book deals with a lot of those things, and actually I would say the last chunk felt much more action-adventure-y than I was anticipating it. I thought this was going to be a much slower read than it ended up being, which I'm here for. I really enjoyed it, and I think that people who read The Poppy War, particularly book one, there are similarities with this that I think make a lot of sense, and it's not a complete jump from, you know, action-y military fantasy novel into dark academia translation-y novel, you know? I think one of the strongest parts of this book is the characters, from both our protagonist Robin and his lovely friends that he meets at Oxford and that kind of found family element, to the more antagonistic characters, like the professor who saves him and like other people that he meets. I think Kuang really captures the essence of people in a way that makes you understand them quite quickly and get to know why they are doing the things they're doing and why they make the choices they make. I'm always here for that, you know? I love knowing why a character's doing what they're doing. I think particularly with Robin, it makes a lot of sense, but I think the side characters are wonderful and I would read more books about other characters in this world. I also have a lot of feelings about them, but we will save that for maybe a spoilery video one day in the future. In terms of creating a setting, obviously this is a fantastical Oxford and Oxford set in the 1800s, so not entirely true to my experience, but then again, how much changes in Oxford really? I thought that it was a really good take, it really felt true, and the bits that weren't accurate, anyway, R.F. Kuang kind of explains it in an author's note at the beginning, like, I wanted to include this cafe that wasn't open at the time because I love this cafe. And to be honest, I kind of felt like you don't need to put that in. It really felt like she was anticipating a lot of critiques from people, so I'm wary of critiquing the Oxford parts, because obviously I'm saying, like, that's silly, it's a fantasy book, right? But in terms of, like, feeling Oxford-y, it does feel Oxford-y in a way that some books that have tried to set things there haven't, and I think that's because R.F. Kuang was writing it while she was there. But we do get to see more of the world than that, and I definitely appreciated getting to adventure out from Oxford as well. It didn't feel too insular, and I think that when it did feel insular, there was a purpose to that. So yeah, I have a history of not necessarily loving dark academia as a genre. I think it can get a little bit caught up in its own grandioseness and not doing enough of what I think is a key part of dark academia as a genre, which is critiquing academia and critiquing this kind of made-up thing that is academia. And this book does that. It does it incredibly well. It does go into why are we doing this, what does this serve, what are the negatives to do with this, alongside the positives and the beauty and the libraries and the books and the you know? And I think that it does that without feeling like it's hammering you over the head. It feels very honest. It feels very, look, this is a fact. I think the fact that it has footnotes as well add to that fact, where it's just saying like, yep, this man did this thing, that was bad, let's go. It doesn't feel preachy, it just feels honest, it just feels true, and as much as it is a fantasy and not all of it can be true, I think that it definitely hit home for me and made me consider Oxford, not necessarily in a way that I hadn't before, but it made me really kind of process those things in a way that I hadn't had to do before, basically. And I think other books tend to throw that in because they know they have to, and then move on as quickly as possible and get back to the nice things. Whereas this, because that's the theme of the book, because that's the idea behind it, you have to engage with that. And I think particularly the character of Letty, who if you have read the book you will encounter Letty, but I won't spoil her for you. I think I really found some of myself in her and some of myself when I was back being a teenager and a young adult there. I saw a lot of myself in Letty, and that was really interesting, and not necessarily a nice thing, but it was a thing. To do like the very basics, I think it's written really, really well. The pacing is just right. It reads wonderfully. The audiobook was a great reading experience for me, but I feel like I've read a couple of chapters physically since, and it flows just as nicely. I think that the plot has a good pace. There are interesting things that happen. The magic is good. All of those basic book things I feel work very well. I don't know how much I would have coped with the footnotes in line with reading, but I tend to go, if a book has footnotes, I'll do the audiobook, because then they're in line and I don't have to dart my eyes around so much. All those basic book things make it worth reading anyway. I think all of those other themes and ideas and seeing myself in characters, this hits very close to home for me, which I don't know if that would necessarily translate to someone who has no context for Oxford other than in dark academia books. I don't know how that would feel, or whether it would be just as impactful because you are still countering that mindset. In terms of things to compare it to, I've read very little what I think most people would call dark academia, just because, as I say, it's not really been my genre. There's things like Ninth House, there's things like I can't think of another good example, but they do exist and you can read them, and I'm sure if you just look up dark academia book recommendations, 1,001 videos will pop up. I actually really enjoyed Legendborn by Tracy Dion. That's a YA that's King Arthur related, but I think actually as a book that engages with the same ideas that dark academia engages with, I think it's really important. In fact, I would go so far as to call Legendborn dark academia because it does a lot of the things it needs to do. So I would recommend that. I'm trying to think what else. If you haven't read the Poppy War trilogy, do I recommend it on the back of this? I think it would be interesting to read Babel first and then read the Poppy War trilogy. particularly book 1, because that does have a lot of the school aspect to it. But I'd be interested to see if you're a person who does that, what you think. If you are a person who's planning on doing that, let me know. I will talk to you about it afterwards, because yeah, I think it would be fascinating to both go back in time on Art of Kuang's writing, but also to go back on those themes and see what similarities there are, perhaps. I think that's all I want to say on that for now. I appreciate this has been quite babbly. I do think I've said what I want to say. I'm hoping it edits down into something that makes sense. Overall, would I recommend that you read this? Yes, I actually would, and I'm really pleased to say that. I thought I was going to be kind of middle of the road. Oh, it's fine, if you like Dark Academia, you'll like this, but I'm okay. But I actually think that even if you're someone who doesn't typically engage with books that are labelled that, I think that this does enough different, and this does enough that feels that getting to the heart of it and getting to what that should be all about, in my opinion. I think it works very well, and it's an enjoyable read, and it's a tragic read, and it is a read that left me shedding a small tear or two. If you have already read this and you do want to talk about it, we can talk on Discord, because I have feelings. And yeah, I'm excited for more people to read this. I'm excited to talk about it. I'm excited for it to be a book club book and to have discussions about it and interviews and all the above. And I hope that you enjoyed reading it as well if you've already read it. And I hope that if you haven't read it already, you enjoy it as well. Are you planning on reading this? Have you already read this? What are your thoughts? Try and keep it spoiler free. As I say, if you want to talk spoilers, come over to Discord down in the comments below. No, well, Discord is linked, but chat about it in the comments. It's fine. While you're down there commenting, if you haven't already, please do subscribe. It makes me feel loved and appreciated. You can also follow me on social media. Come hang out on Discord, where we have chill chats about books. Nothing makes me feel more loved and appreciated than my patrons over on Patreon, who support the channel and get early access to videos and bonus content. If you would like to join their number, that's linked below. Thank you so much for watching. That's all from me, and I will see you in the next one. That was very blithery, I'm sorry.
It's gonna be some bloopers now.
Welcome back. What? Mouthful of smoothie.